that's not the first time that I've covered a situation like that. I've covered that way too many times, and I really hate to have to cover it. But in the end, I feel better when I just look around and see the good. Like, yeah, there's a lot of bad in the world, but there's also a lot of good. There's like this Mr. Rogers quote that I'm probably gonna mess up, that he said that whenever he was a little boy, his mom used to tell him and just find the helpers. There's always going to be scary situations, but in those situations, you can always find people that are doing good and helping.
What age were you guys when you got your first set of bundles? I remember I was in 6th grade and was so tired of standing out in my predominantly white elementary school, being one of the only girls with braids. So I was like, Mom, it's time to get with the program, get me some bundles. And you know what? She did just that. We got me a 10-inch sew-in, and you know what? Once I got them, I felt so much more confident because I was conforming to everyone else. I felt like I fit in, yada, yada, yada. Fast forward a couple years later, history is repeating itself. Not necessarily within me, but within our society. I don't know if you guys can tell, but there has been so many instances of younger women of color who feel the need to conform themselves, their personalities, their hairstyles to society's standards. We see that within the workforce. We see that in entertainment, in so many different places, so many different environments in our world. So today, to further investigate this topic and how we can truly embrace our natural selves, I sat down with Fox 46 news anchor and former Fox 4 news anchor KACI Jones. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Chidera Brittney podcast. I am here with Miss KACI Jones.
Hey, Chidera. Happy to be here.
Thank you so much for joining me. I'm so excited to get to talk to you. Honestly, you've inspired me so much. I think the first time I heard about you was when I saw the tweet that you tweeted, I believe it was last year, when you mentioned braids and being able to wear them in the industry that you worked in. And I just thought that was so inspiring. Like, when did you feel like really welcomed within like transitioning between different hairstyles and working in the journalism broadcasting industry that you're in?
Wow, that's a really complex question about feeling welcome. So I don't know that I've ever really felt welcomed to do anything. I think that it was pretty early on when I went to an HBCU. I saw a lot of diversity. I saw a lot of other, some of my colleagues in school, they would wear their hair in different hairstyles. And it was always told to us that it would be easier to get a job if you had straight hair. That was in college. And then when I first got into the industry, my first job, I wore my hair curly for a little bit. It wasn't really welcomed in the newsroom. There wasn't a whole lot of diversity. And then when I got my next job in Rochester, New York, my news director was a lot more, he emphasized diversity and equity and inclusion, so, and most importantly, authenticity. So he said, like, wear your hair however you would wear your hair. So after he told me, I just did it anytime I wanted. I took this one news director's advice this one time and just said, you're right. Authenticity is key. People like when you're the real you. And naturally, that's what I would have done in that moment. I was covering protests a lot because, George Floyd had just been murdered. So it was just easier at that time for me to wear my hair in braids. And a lot of people, after I took the braids out, then it became like a discussion of like, they're making her take her hair out. But it wasn't really that. I just naturally I just want to be able to mix it up. And in this industry, we often get told you need to keep a constant look because they say that the viewer identifies best with somebody who like always looks the same. But I don't really think that's true because people naturally don't always look the same. So.
I could not agree more. Thank you for that response. Can we first talk about you growing up before we get into FAMU? I think that's how you pronounce it, right? FAMU?
FAMU, yeah.
FAMU. When you were growing up as a child, did you switch up your hairstyles a lot?
I mean, no, I mean, I wore my hair, like, I started looking at my hair as like a form of expression way later on in life.
Okay.
But growing up, I will say my parents also stressed authenticity. They never really called it that, but I was told to be confident and told to be comfortable being me. So I think the foundation that I grew up, with definitely helped me feel comfortable to do it now.
That's awesome. And I feel like I kind of contrast with you in a sense because growing up, I went to a predominantly white high school, elementary school, middle school. So, growing up for me, wearing my braids, it became like in sixth grade, I remember declaring, like, I'm never getting braids again, honestly. Like, I just started getting sew ins and things like that at such a young age. So now seeing, like, looking back, I'm like, that's such a young age to really not really, I don't know, just kind of like look down upon yourself and your like authentic self. So I'm thinking like going forward, hearing how you went to your university where it's super welcoming, you see people who are genuinely starting to be their authentic self. That's super heartwarming. That's really good to hear. That's awesome. So do you
Yeah, I think when it comes to hair though, I did start getting perms really early. Like I started my first relaxer, I guess let me use the proper term. My first relaxer was when I was like 4 or 5 years old because my mom said I told her that I wanted my hair relaxed and that's what she did for me. And as soon as when I got to FAMU and it was much more common for girls to wear their natural hair, then I became more comfortable wearing that. In fact, a man who was doing my hair at the hair salon, I told him, like, I always wanted to have curly hair. And he said, well, if you stop getting relaxers, then you would. And lo and behold, my hair was curly. So I was like, oh, how about that?
That's awesome. Did you do the big chop with like your perm? Because I actually did that over quarantine and I'm growing out my natural curly hair.
Yay, congratulations.
Thanks.
I never did the big chop. I just kind of like gradual, like I just kept getting trims. I just cut it pretty short, like a little bit past my ears and just kept getting trims as it grew. But I didn't take the big step like you. So props to you.
Thank you.
Quarantine is a great time to do it though.
It definitely was. I think that was just a big mark of transition. Like no longer am I going to, I don't know, hold myself down, allow myself to be digestible to others, like that saying, it's like, you can choke on me now. Like I'm not no longer going to digest myself. That's me. So, and that's what I see in you too.
I love that for you. Yes. I think people like reach that point in their lives, like just at different times. That's why I really love like senior citizens, like if you notice the older you are, generally, the more real you are. Because, you've been living as yourself for all these years, 65 plus years, and now you feel comfortable doing it. So I think the sooner you get to be that way, the better. Whoever that is for you.
I could not agree more. I actually, over this past summer, I did home health with an 81-year-old woman, and she just, like, embraced herself so much, and I don't know, she just really inspired me in a way that I'm like, I want to live my life so genuine and so true to myself that I can no longer pretend or try to feel like a sense of belonging. I'm just going to make myself belong. So
I love that.
thanks.
You belong everywhere. I think the concept just has to change. Like you're in this world, like you're here for a reason. You have a purpose. And if you're in a space, God put you there for a reason. So you belong there. I definitely wouldn't let a human tell me where I was supposed to be if God put me there.
100%. And you kind of talked about how you never really felt necessarily welcomed in an environment. How do you think that really took a toll on your mental health, on the way you were able to perform, being an anchor?
So I wasn't always like, it was a long journey to be an anchor. Like, so let's like rewind all the way. Yeah, like I'm so grateful now, like to be in a position where I'm getting to do what I've always wanted to do. Because as a child, I wanted to be a news anchor, but I had no idea that you got to start somewhere, right? So my first job was in Midland, Odessa, Texas. So the way that TV markets work is there's 210 of them or something like that, and the lower the number, the better. So at the top, you have like New York City, LA, Chicago, Philly, I think is number 4. And my first job was in number 146, Midland, Odessa, Texas. So there wasn't a whole lot there. It was, if you've ever seen the movie Friday Night Lights, it was like a high school football town that's literally like the movie is made after this town that I was living in. And I found out that I was like the 4th Black woman to ever work there or something like that, which is ridiculous because it was 2016 at the time. But I had a news director who at the time wasn't very welcoming. He told me that I needed to focus on being a reporter, not an anchor. He said I wasn't really even that good at reporting, so I wouldn't anchor. So honestly, that was one of the best pieces of advice anybody's ever given me, because I learned to do it all myself with excellence. I shot everything, edited everything, wrote everything, and that's what you call an MMJ. And I just learned to do that, and I was the best. He never told me I was the best, but I'm humbly stating that I used to train people after being told that I wasn't even good at it. So I was really proud of myself for being able to like lift myself out of the hole that he had put me in, because I was used to in life being encouraged. So for this man to like come in and tell me that I wasn't good, especially after he hired me, it was really messy for me. And then there was also that period of time where there was Mike Brown shooting. So, you know, all the protests and everything were going on in Ferguson. And, you know, it sparked, you know, nationwide protests. And then there was that shooting in Dallas where that man killed police officers like at a protest. And then it was up to me in this newsroom to just call out some of the unequal coverage that it seemed like the conversation shifted to, you know, protecting the police, and it was getting away from what the core of the conversation was. So unfortunately, nobody else in the newsroom was willing to have the conversation about where it should go. And then it was just me. And I felt like if I didn't say anything, then we would be getting inaccurate information to a lot of people and be responsible for misinformation. So I felt this really heavy burden to, you know, speak up and say what was right, speak up against things that I thought were unethical. And it wasn't received very well. It was like, I mean, they eventually listened to me, but I felt like I was like in this really tumultuous fight that I shouldn't have had to be in. And at that point, I think I really wanted to quit the business because I didn't think it got any better than that. And thankfully, it does get better, because my next job, the newsroom, was a lot more diverse, and a lot of the same things that I would speak up against at my last job, that was like standard practice at my new position, which was in Rochester, New York, which was market 76. So I went from 146 to 76, and it was a better environment. It was more diverse, and I stayed there for 3 years, and that was the news director who told me to just be me. And he said he hired me to be me and told me not to be anyone else. In fact, he even called me into his office one day and said something about how I spoke on TV that day. He felt like it wasn't the way that I normally speak. And he was right. I rewatched it. I was like, yeah, why did I talk like that? It was me trying to sound like a news reporter. But I am a news reporter. Why am I trying to sound like anything? You know, it's just be yourself. So he really instilled that in me and gave me the safe space to be myself. So that's when I feel like grew into the best, and not the best, but a much better version of me in a place where I just, you know, felt welcomed and included.
That's wonderful. And like, what does it really feel like to be included, feel welcome when you're at work? You just feel a lot more comfortable when you are reporting and just able to just be yourself, really.
Absolutely. I mean, when you're in an environment that feels safe, you can be yourself, And you just like, the job is already very tense, you know, if you're on the scene of like something that's breaking news or something, or even just a regular, you know, anytime you're speaking live on TV, it could be pretty like high stress, anything could happen. And you just need to be in the best frame of mind, you know, to do that kind of work. And I think that being in this safe space allowed me to. So I'm really happy. I've actually worked for that same person a few times. He's hired me a few different places, including the job I have now. So shout out to KACI Clark.
Yes, that's wonderful.
His name's KACI too.
KACI, oh wow, what are the odds? Isn't that great? Well, I just wanted to go like switch gears a little bit and talk more about just your job in itself. I read the book called You Are What You Read, and how basically like you need to manage your media diet. So working as a anchor in the news, do you often feel kind of low sometimes when you're having to report a lot of negative, a lot of sad information to others?
You know, I'm really glad you asked me that today, because there was a 3-year-old who was shot by a group of teens who fired like 80 shots, and some of them went into a home and cars, and it hit a little boy while he was sleeping and killed him. And he was only 3 years old. And stories like that always really hurt, because it's like, you know, it's a baby and he didn't deserve that. And that was just this morning. And things like that really happen every day. I mean, not that bad, but that's not the first time that I've covered a situation like that. I've covered that way too many times, and I really hate to have to cover it. But in the end, I feel better when I just look around and see the good. You know, like, yeah, there's a lot of bad in the world, but there's also a lot of good. You know, there's like this Mr. Rogers quote that I'm probably gonna mess up, that he said that whenever he was a little boy, his mom used to tell him to, and just find the helpers. There's always going to be scary situations, but in those situations, you can always find people that are doing good and helping. So I try to look for that. I just try to, there's not always a bright side to everything, but there's always something positive that you could focus on.
And do you look towards anyone, any mentor, or any person to kind of help you along your path of looking on the brighter side of things? Or any like being the Lord, anything like that? God.
So in terms of like positivity, what my motivation to stay positive is really just, I just read the Bible, I do devotions. I have mentors that I have met along my way that I can call on whenever I'm feeling really down, you know, about certain things, you know, people that understand the business and understand how things work, and they give me really great advice. That's something I'm really blessed to have. Along the way, a lot of, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but, you know, this industry is really small, especially when it comes to Black women. And I'm really grateful that along my way, I've met some Black women who are willing to instill some of their wisdom into me and always be someone that I can look up to.
And could you name a couple of those women and just their attributes to your well-being?
So one of my a news anchor that I've met that I love and cherish my relationship with is a woman named Deanna Dewberry. So Deanna is a like 13-time Emmy award-winning anchor. She works in Rochester, New York now, but she used to work in Dallas for a while. She's the evening anchor now at the NBC affiliate there. And one thing that I admire most about her is, first of all, she's the same person on and off camera. She's a beautiful person on and off camera. And I love the way that she's able to tactfully say things in the newsroom. Like the situation that I was talking about in my first job, where they shifted the coverage to the police instead of the instead of another unarmed Black man dying. I admire the way that she's able to put her words together in such a graceful way and explain to our, most of the time, white colleagues why something is the way that it is in a digestible way, but she doesn't lose the message. And a lot of people, sometimes they try to say things, they water it down so much that you lose the message. And working alongside her, I learned to say things in a much better way, more digestible way, but still get my point across.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I think it's so important to have representation, as Black women. You are a news anchor. I'm a freshman in college. I'm looking for more mentors. Luckily, I have you right here in front of me just as an example of Black excellence, women who can still be so achieving and not let any sort of boundary hinder them. So I really admire that. Um, I just think that, as a Black woman in your field, is there any point in time where you feel like you are not heard necessarily? Or is there any point in time where you feel like insecurities of the past, your past jobs where you feel like you have to almost like lower yourself down or become a different way? Like you stated, you weren't really talking like yourself that one point in time. Has there been multiple instances like that?
So after I learned that I was doing that, I no longer did that because I felt like if I changed who I was, then that was me becoming someone else that I'm not. And one thing about me is I just always want to try to stay true to myself. And sometimes it's tough because like I'm constantly changing, constantly growing, and hopefully I'm not done growing because I have a long way to go. But I have learned, I don't think there's a whole lot of instances where I feel too insecure. In the times that I do, I just remind myself that I'm human and I make mistakes sometimes. There's a lot of things that I do that if there was a way to redo them, I absolutely would. I saw this meme the other day that was like, do you ever go in social situations and say, or leave social situations and say, wow, that wasn't my best work? Like I say that. Well, in my head, I say that all the time. So I feel like I've done a lot of work to love myself. So whenever I get in situations where I doubt my ability, whenever I get in situations that some might call imposter syndrome, I think I'm able to snap out of it a little bit more. I mean, a little bit quicker because I've done the work to try to understand the value that I bring to any team. So even though sometimes you can get into an environment that maybe isn't, a great place for you to be, maybe like you don't feel welcomed or you don't feel comfortable there, you don't feel like it's a safe space. In those situations, I continue to be myself. I make sure that I don't blend into my environment. Instead, I just continue to stand out and continue to be myself. And then I do more work on the back end when I'm at home, just making sure that I have my own safe space and I'm preserving my time and energy to know that when I go into the situation where maybe I don't feel as welcomed, I have the energy and the confidence that I need to be up for the challenge, because it's really a challenge to be sometimes in these rooms where you don't feel accepted. But if you really do the work and love yourself, you'll know what you bring to the table. And one of the greatest things about America is we're all so different, but we get into these rooms and then we like all become the same. And it's like, what's the point of getting all these people together? We're all going to think the same thing.
Right.
So I just try to remember that. I'm like, I was hired for a reason. I start showing myself in the interview though. That's another thing I do. I just, from the beginning, I just let it all out.
That's wonderful. It seems like you're a very self-aware person and that you are just, I don't know, you just exude like yourself. Like
Thank
you're just you.
you.
That's amazing. So
I appreciate that.
going forward, what advice would you give to your future self down the line in order to ensure that you are still not necessarily going on the right path, but just that you are continuing to be authentic to yourself?
So that's a great question.
Thank you.
Because nobody ever really asked me what advice I would give to my future self. It's usually like your past self, you know?
Right?
Yeah, so that's a little different. So I think, so for me though, I don't know that like I guess I would say to my future self that I think I'm gonna look back at a lot of things that I did and say, wow, I really can't believe that I said any of that, did any of that, took that kind of chance. I'm always going to find other ways to say something. And later on, I'm the type of person that like overthinks conversations that I had, like 4 hours ago. I start to think about it, even if it was like a really tiny conversation. And I think I would tell my future self to just, keep hanging in there, I guess. It's just like keep loving yourself. I would tell my past self, I think for me, I have better advice to give to my past self. And I think my past self, I would tell her that it's okay to just be you. Like, whoever that is, whatever you like, just embrace it. Try it. Like your teens and your 20s are really for learning yourself. And I mean, even your 30s, like as long as it takes to know who you are, just study yourself and understand what it is that you like and understand that it could change, and just I think it's really about being in tune with yourself. And if I could tell my younger self anything, it would be to just concentrate on how you feel a little bit more. How do you feel when you're in these situations? Slow things down and think about your feelings more than I think I sometimes respond very quickly instead of like feeling and then responding. So that's something that I would like to tell my past self and future self to work on, is to just feel first and then respond
And
a
then
little.
respond. Well, that's definitely some advice I will be taking. I know, I just started college this past month. And, when you're in an environment where you're meeting so many different people, it's always in the back of your head, well, how do these people perceive me? What am I giving off? But it's also important to realize, like, how do I perceive others as well? It's not necessarily always looking at what I'm doing and nitpicking every single like or conversation or anything like that, but really it's just about how I feel, what I want to do, how I eventually want to feel, and what I will do to feel the way I want to feel. So,
That makes sense. I think that I also stopped caring what people thought a really long time ago. Like maybe like I think that I did that when I was in like elementary school maybe. And I don't know how I did it. I don't know if it's like some brain function. Like I sometimes catch myself, caring. I do on occasion when I'm like overthinking these conversations that I had later, but I get over my overthinking by just remembering who I am at my core. And I'm a woman who's growing, who makes mistakes, sometimes is a little flippant, talks too much, too fast. But
same.
hopefully I keep growing and then I don't do it anymore.
Yes. Have you read the book Becoming by Michelle Obama?
Not the whole thing,
Not the whole
but it
thing?
is. I do need to finish.
It's
What did you think of the book?
I honestly really admired it. I thought that, how she mentioned you're always becoming, as we look to our younger generation, we're always like, what do you want to be when you grow up? A news anchor, a reality TV star. But it's really like you are not necessarily your occupation, you're not your career, but you are just, you're you. You're always becoming, ever changing, evolving, elevating. And I think that's something we need to implement more within our youth, more within even freshmen in college. I see today people who are undecided and feel have like low self-esteem in the sense that they don't know who they are, but I don't think any of us really know who we are. We're always constantly becoming and growing. So that book is phenomenal, and I think you should definitely read it. The rest of it,
Yeah,
at least.
I have to finish reading it. I agree with, when it comes to being undecided, I think there's way too much of a like you're absolutely right. You are not, your career does not define you. At any moment you could lose your job, right? Like I learned that in 2020. I was laid off in the pandemic, just like millions of other people. And I thought my job was pandemic proof, but because we definitely worked every day, we were essential workers, but I got laid off. And it was a very humbling experience to remind me that we are not our careers. And I think if we make more of a focus to your purpose, concentrate on whatever your purpose is, whatever your passion is, I think your career will come. I think when you're on the right path, things just fall into place how they're supposed to. And I think there's way too much of an emphasis on what profession a person wants to be in, how much money it would make, instead of the other way around, figuring out what a person really likes to do, what they're good at. What there's something for everyone. Like I'm always shocked when I hear about how people are making money. I'm like, what? They did what? What kind of career is that? But people find careers.
Yeah, I think just in our time now, we are at our most diverse, most just open, free state, I think. And I'm just excited for the future and what is in store. I'm excited to, just take on the real world, in quotes, just being my authentic self. And yeah, I just want to thank you so much, KACI, for joining me today. I honestly learned a lot, and you've inspired me. I know you've inspired many other, not only women of color, but women in general, men in general. And I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope that you continue to just keep doing you.
Thanks, Chidera. And I feel inspired because I love hearing from people like you, freshmen in college. I know that the youth are to be the ones that change the world. Like you are doing things I never even thought about doing when I was your age. And I love that. Like that's how it's supposed to be. I love
Thank
that.
you. Thank you so much, KACI. I hope to hear from you very soon.
Yes. It was nice talking to you.
You as well. Goodbye.
Bye.
The Chidera Brittney podcast is available on almost all of your favorite podcast apps and YouTube. The Chidera Brittney podcast is a production of Fredcast. Think, speak, act.